shortly after I had left my marriage, I experienced four near-death experiences simultaneously, one after the other, within a span of 2 years. I don't believe anything happens by mistake. Everything is by design. And in those moments, it was just like deeper catalyst moments. It's just this huge excavation that happens and that you understand yourself a little bit more and you uncover yourself a little bit more. When you're leading with the creator and you're leading with divine essence, you see the beauty in everybody. There's a lot of ideology. There's a lot of false belief systems that we create in order to just live a life that isn't fulfilling and it isn't actually our life to live. Every second of the day, we make thousands of choices of how we want to live our life and how we want to live in our highest alignment.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Vibrant Soul Society, The Conversations. I'm your host, Baba Sam, the Miracle Man. Our mission here is to help you discover that you are greater than your thoughts, especially the negative thoughts. And beyond our thoughts is our vibrant soul. So that's our goal here, to see the greater essence of yourself. But we're really focused on the human journey, like how do we get there? So thanks for your likes, your comments, your subscribes. It helps get this message out there that we are not defined by our thoughts. So I'm very honored and blessed to have Roxanne with us on the conversations today. So welcome, Roxanne.
Thank you so much for having such an honor to be here. I'm excited to just delve into where spirit leads us.
Yeah, we had an amazing conversation before we began today, so I'm really curious to see where this goes today. But to begin with, people that are unfamiliar with you, how would you describe Roxanne?
Absolutely. So I am a global luminary and my sacred purpose is really to empower other leaders, conscious leaders, global leaders to really affect change within their communities, within their countries, within their world, and how that impacts the dynamic of how we live and how we love and care and have compassion for one another. My mission is about bringing human connection back into our experiences and also embodying our multidimensional self and how we can actually self-actualize, heal, and how we can heal our mind, body, soul, and how we have the power because we are truly limitless. And that is, the intentionality of everything that I do in terms of the retreats that we facilitate, the products that we design, everything that we curate into co-creational spaces like this beautiful conversation. It's really about bringing and driving that forward, that we are the change.
Yeah, that's really good and important work, but I'm just curious, how to discover your sacred purpose?
Mhm. Ever since I was a little girl, I just had this deep, reverent knowingness that I was being called to serve humanity. And I didn't know how to vocabularize the feeling that I was being called to elevate. And I couldn't even speak to what that elevation was. I just knew that I was going to be serving at a global level, and I had no idea what that was intended for. I remember ever since I was a little girl, I just was very uniquely different than a lot of my friends. I would, see the angels, I would hear angels, I would always know that life was such a beautiful gift, even though I went through a lot of trials and tribulations, as any child really navigates through within their own self-discovery journey. And there was this beautiful moment that I really came to this reckoning of that I was just uniquely different than everybody else, but everybody was uniquely different than everybody else. Nobody was of the same soul design or the same soul pattern. And I remember as a little girl, people would come to me. I was probably around the tender age of 5, and my mom would take me to the grocery store and we'd have family friends around and people would come up to me, strangers would come up to me and share their entire life story with me and ask me what I thought about their life and like where I thought that they should move towards in their journey and their purpose. And my mom was always very taken back, like, wow, you should really be a psychologist when you get older. Like, you should really go into therapy and really help people. People really just open up to you. And I never really understood that was part of my internal medicine. That was just something that I thought everybody did. When you know who you are, it's very challenging to be able to see outside of yourself. It's very challenging to see yourself in other people's eyes. So I just carried that gift, and that was something that I knew that I was It was something that I really loved doing. I had a very big passion for, and I loved hearing people's stories, and I loved being able to just sit and be their sounding board and hold space and give my perspective and my perception on something and allow them to marinate in it and choose what they wanted to do with their life. And that kind of happened to me my whole life. And I remember trying to resonate with the family friends. Did you have this calling that you're being asked to serve, but you don't know what that is, like this burning feeling? And they would always say, "Oh, no, I don't have that, but I know like I want to be a lawyer or a doctor." And I was like, "That's beautiful." But it was something different than that. And, I remember going through my teenage years, and it was just something that I didn't feel like as a teenager going through high school that I really openly wanted to share with everybody, and it's not that I put it onto the back burner, it was just something that I didn't vocabularize as strongly as I did when I was a child, and I ended up going through a very unhealthy pattern of just abusive cycles of relationships because I didn't understand my worth. And throughout these explorations and throughout those pathways, it was also very powerful teaching moments for me because it allowed these were the mirrored reflections that I needed to really understand what my worth and my value was. And I ended up being in a very unhealthy marriage. And I ended up leaving with my 3 beautiful children. And at that moment, I didn't understand that that was a bit of a catalyst moment for me. It was like a small catalyst moment for me to actually choose myself and to choose my children's highest alignment. I didn't understand that. I was just taking the necessary steps that I felt that was needed. And shortly after I had left my marriage, I experienced 4 near-death experiences simultaneously, one after the other within a span of 2 years. And the first near-death experience was a massive catalyst moment. At that time, I was an executive at a local college. I always worked part of as an executive team. I had strong academics, strong career, and I had this first near-death experience when I went over a cliff and we survived. The trauma of that, the life review that happens when you're near death, it was just so traumatizing that it allowed me to go into more of a deep self introspection, a more deep self reflection to really ask more deep, riveting questions. Are you really happy? Are you really happy in the career that you're in? Are you really fulfilling your purpose, like your intent and what you feel called that you're meant to do? Are you in the relationships that are actually healthful, and are they bountiful, and are they nourishing? There was all of these deep questions. What are your beliefs around this? Why do you feel that you need to do this? Why do you feel that you need to do that? And it was just like this huge deconstruction of this construction that had happened throughout my entire life of the should-haves and the would-haves and the could-haves. And I had compressed all of these beliefs and these core values around these things that really weren't in the congruency of me. And that started this catalyst moment where I started doing more deep self exploration. And after my last near death experience, those 3 near death experiences were pretty simultaneous. The one after the cliff, I had hemorrhaged to death on 3 different occasions where I had almost lost my life each time. And in those moments, it was just like deeper catalyst moments as when you go through these pathways, once you start having moments of awakening, you're continuously awakening for the rest of your life and beyond. It's just this huge excavation that happens and that you understand yourself a little bit more and you uncover yourself a little bit more, which is really powerful. And that was the process that I was in. And after my last near death experiences, I was actually being called by my ancestors to come and understand my history, to come and understand my heritage. And part of my ancestry is Native American here in the Canadian lands. So I'm French and Native American, which is a tribal community here called Métis. And the Métis people are, I've known just to be very, obviously, very spiritual beings, as I'm sure a lot of people understand. Native Americans are very connected to the creator, our songs, our traditions, our plant medicines, things like that we look to for effective healing. And it was just this beautiful pathway that I was being called. I had to sit with my elders and I had to really understand what I was being called for. And it was just a really beautiful journey, which kind of put me on my own journey of self-actualized healing from that first near-death experience. And it was just a continual process and journey of healing, of deep healing, self-actualized healing. So that was our pathway. And when I sat with that, it was like when I realized that we can actually heal our mind, we can actually heal our thought patterns, we can actually heal our belief systems, we can actually heal the physical body, we can actually heal the emotional body, and we can also heal the spiritual and the energetic and the soulful body as well, even though it is perfect as is and its divine presence. When it comes here, it also has imprintation.
Wow, there's so much to dive into there. What I'm finding that people are on this spiritual journey, their teenage years are almost socially awkward. They don't fit in, that they're like, there's a mismatch here. I don't get these people. I don't get their drama. I just don't get them.
Yeah. It was just like I didn't want to be enmeshed in that because I loved every being. Like, as much as we're human, we sometimes don't like characteristics about another person. But at the end of the day, when you're leading with the creator and you're leading with divine essence, you see the beauty in everybody. You see the potentiality in everybody. You see the light in everybody because that is the intentionality of why we came here. There's that piece. And then the other piece is I don't know why other people want to hurt other people. I don't know why other people want to be disrespectful to other people or not be in integrity. There's a lot of the things that you just didn't understand as a teenager, and you're trying to make sense of the world and of yourself.
That's why you were dealing with those self-worth issues because you're like, you start getting to this judgment and comparison of others. My life doesn't measure up to them. It doesn't measure up to that. And you really start to isolate that you're not good enough. You're not worthy. And that really stems into a lot of beliefs that carry people throughout their whole life. And it seems like you were able to flip this when you saw this marriage was not supportive.
Yeah. And I really, what I have understood from my own self actualized journey is that my father was absent in my life. Not that he intended to be absent, just the way that the locations were of where he lived and my mother lived. It just didn't make it feasible for us to have daily access or weekly access and whatnot. There was obviously a lot of activation and a lot of wounding around there where I was holding imprintation within my body, within my emotional body, within my belief body, that there was this aspect that he had abandoned and he had neglected us, and that I must not be lovable. I must not be worthy of his love. I must not be worthy for him to fight for me or to relocate and all these things. That's a young child's mind, right? That's a young child's mind creating beliefs because they're trying to make sense of why somebody would choose not to step into a place where they've chosen to have a child and to obviously care and love and foster and help grow that child, right? A lot of that had came from those belief systems, but in reality, that wasn't the belief. That wasn't the reality. My father loved us very much, but that was a belief that I had curated, and I had stepped into relationships wanting to feel chosen and wanting to feel like I was worthy and wanting to feel like I was valued and I was loved and I would never be abandoned or be neglected again, which also lowered my standard on who I would select because whoever showed me the more attention, or whoever showed me that they were willing at the first love bombing stage would want to have me in their space. And I'd feel so grateful for that when I was getting breadcrumbs, when I really should have been getting the whole loaf of bread.
That's really important that you're able to trace that back. A lot of people have those abandonment issues. When you have those abandonment issues, you do have lower self-worth. Then you find someone that pays attention to you. Hey, somebody's paying attention to me. They must be the one. And you
Yeah.
grab onto that person, like, oh, wait a
And
second.
then, yeah. And then we create belief to make that the reality because that's what the mind does. The mind is so powerful. We have so many centers of intelligence throughout our body, but the mind is the computing system. So if I tell the mind and I give the mind a command that this is what I want for my life, it's going to do everything to facilitate that co-creation. So I was telling my mind that this must be the one. And here are all the reasonings when it's the one, but I never actually felt the knowingness of that. It was the logical sense, the analytical part that just wanted it to be true, the belief.
Yeah, I love that. The logical versus the knowing. It's really important because we get really stuck in the head, like whatever my mind was processing and telling me became my truth, as
Yeah.
opposed to it wasn't really the steeper truth, that place of knowing. So how would you help people distinguish between the logical mind and that deeper sense of knowing?
The deep sense of knowing is just a knowing. It's like when you have a child, you unequivocally know that you love that child. It's an unconditionality that cannot be explained with reason. It's just a knowingness. It's a profound knowingness. Or when you meet your life partner. It's like this profound knowingness comes over you, but there's no logical explanation. When we have logical explanation, when we go into the analytics of everything, and when we go into the fears and the doubts and things of that nature, we are making decisions out of the mind. We are trying to construct something to be the reality when it really isn't the reality. When we're sitting in meditation, and I think this is maybe more a little bit more towards the spiritual communities, but when you're sitting into meditation or breath work, or when you're in the presence of spirit and presence of yourself and presence of creator, when you feel the knowingness of that love come through you and that sense of inner peace and inner fulfillment come into your knowingness, whole part of your body just goes into a moment of stillness and calmness. It's because you're in a place of knowingness. You feel the knowingness coming in always in the solar plexus, right? That's where it hits right at first, because the solar plexus is related to the solar universe, right? So that's our direct channel pathway of that umbilical cord of information of where we receive divine intelligence, even though it comes through our crown, even though it comes and hits every center of intelligence that we have within us in our meridians, it actually comes from the solar plexus. That's why it was named that. So when we come into this place where we're coming from a knowingness, and it's like this undoubtingly knowingness, the mind can create doubt and can create fears around the knowingness, because the beliefs will try and create whatever it needs to, intended to. But the knowingness is a sensation. It's not a thought process. It's a sensation that overzoos your body. And when we're in the mind and when we're making into the thought process, into the belief process, we're trying to curate information. We're trying to be analytical. We're trying to find things that are going to back whatever we choose to want to believe.
Mm. Yeah, you mentioned a word there. So when did you discover meditation?
I have meditated since I was a young child. I would lay in my bed and I would just step into my breath. And I had no idea that it was meditation, because back then, no parent and there was no social media, there was no internet. I had no idea what it was, but I would just breathe and I would channel light. And all of a sudden, my whole body, like I wouldn't go into astral projection, but my whole light body would feel full of light, full of love, full of inner peace, full of inner stillness. And I always radiated that in any presence that I had. And I didn't understand that was meditation. I just thought that was connecting to God, which it is, right? Like meditation is that connection to creator, to consciousness, all of these beautiful things. So ever since I was a little girl, I've been unknowingly meditating.
But it sounds like you had those socially awkward years. So it wasn't
Yeah.
really that you weren't really bringing that meditative practice.
Yeah.
So how did that shift where you realized, oh, I can use my meditation practice and bring it into life?
Yeah, when I always refer to my meditation more of like just connection to God and connection to spirit. And the way that it would happen, like when I was a teenager, it was like this awkwardness that when I would go into breath, I always like worried like what other people's perceptions of if they saw me breathing a certain way or being funny in my breath, that I would get made fun of or something like that nature. It's like people in high school weren't of the kindest nature at times. And so it was never something that I would do public. And there was just this point where I was like, I lost a little bit of that. There was a little bit of that disconnection within myself. I allowed that disconnection to happen because I allowed the feeling of not resonating with anyone to make me feel like I was weird, like I was different, that maybe I shouldn't be doing these things. And I couldn't speak to it to anybody because nobody would understand me. I've tried and nobody understood me at that time, not understanding that I wasn't vocabularizing things correctly. So there was this stage, I would say probably from 12 on, from 12 to probably 22, where that wasn't my primary focus at that point anymore. It was like I had not lost the connection, because we're always in that connection, but lost that daily connection of just going back into the breath and coming back into that place of knowingness.
Yeah. So it's this phase that we go through where we forget, we remember, we forget. It's that lifelong journey that we go on to stay
Yeah.
in our essence, stay in our truth.
When we're teenagers, we think we know everything when we know nothing. So I'm like, oh, I know how to do that. I know what that is. Like, I know, but in reality, I didn't. I knew nothing.
I love the phrase I know, and it prevents them from growth and really expanding forward because they're shutting themselves off.
Yeah, it's the ego and the spiritual ego that kicks in. And that's why, this pathway and this journey is a self-mastery journey, because there's so many egoic deaths. And that doesn't mean that the ego is bad. It is absolutely not bad. It is here to keep us into a state of survival. However, there is a place where if we allow it to run the entirety of our life, it brings us into a place of stubbornness, of not being open-minded and not being into a growth mindset, right? Of wanting to change our beliefs, wanting to change some of our values, wanting to pivot our life course because we're in a state of always intellectually knowing and not actually gut intuitive knowing.
Mm. Yeah, if we go back to your first NDE when you're going off of a cliff,
Yeah,
and this sometimes it's hard to see, but there's no mistakes in the universe. So maybe you were meant to have that experience to go
absolutely.
deeper into what makes me really happy, my purpose, why am I here? It gets you to question things.
Absolutely, and at that time when we went over the cliff, it was here we get really bad, like, snowstorms, and it was a snowstorm day, and we literally went off a 90-foot drop into a frozen lake, like, we should not have survived, like, we should absolutely not have survived, like, the paramedics, the police officers, firefighters, we should not have survived, and we had literally missed a massive boulder by 2 millimeters that would have crushed us on impact part of the lake, like, the lake was like this, and there was, like, all these rock boulders, rock shavings that were there, but there was this massive rock underneath the water that if the vehicle would have landed on that, we would have been dead on impact, and that vehicle should have rolled onto the ice, and we went through the ice, so, like, we should have died, right? So that I don't believe anything happens by mistake, everything is by design, everything is by the way of awakening, everything is by the way that it is intended to. I contracted that. I contracted to come to a place to have deep awakening if I wasn't following my soul's highest alignment. And that's exactly what happened in that pathway that day. And when I had that moment, I had spent about 20 years of my life in healthcare. And I was working at a cancer center before I had went into academics and to the academia world. And my whole purpose in healthcare was to serve our clients. I worked at a cancer center, and majority of our clients were palliative, end of stage life. We had a lot of pediatric population, a lot of young population, and obviously a lot of elder population. That moment of serving, not that it was feeling the mark, but it was feeling the place of fulfillment that I was able to help people through a transitional process that was a very challenging place emotionally for a lot of people to undergo. And to be able to be there, to listen to the stories, to be in that place of receivership. I had stepped out of that world when I went into the academics and I was working with executives because at that point, I was farther removed in terms of being able to be of service. It was more of a service to the business, a service to an industry,
Mm.
and not actually service to humanity. Even though it had some disposition to humanity, it wasn't the daily interaction that I needed to actually feel that part of my sacred purpose, which I didn't know was part of my sacred purpose, but I just know where I felt fulfilled in moments of my career and my trajectory and where I didn't feel fulfilled within in that moment. So those thought patterns of career, I had already had a measuring aspect of what it was to have fulfilling work and what it was to have less fulfilling work. And was I serving from a place of serving others or was I serving a place to serve my wallet? Because being an executive, you're a C-level executive, you're making a lot of money. And money is very attractive because it's a high energy exchange, but it is not what the world is meant for. So it's about that human connection. It's coming back to that place of serving. And that was, what am I doing this for? Why am I doing this? Right? Those are the questions that I'm asking myself, being very honest with myself. Is this because I want my family to be proud of me, to say, wow, my daughter is doing this and doing that? There's a lot of ideology. There's a lot of false belief systems that we create in order to just live a life that isn't fulfilling and it isn't actually our life to live.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to understand something. I just want to see where this first NDE came. Was it when you moved from the cancer to the executive and you were moving away from that call
No,
to serve humanity?
No, I was already in the educational sector for about almost 7 years by that point. So I was already well in it, but it was just like that measuring of knowing what was fulfilling work for me, just in the place of serving, where it wasn't in that way fulfilling. Had its moments of fulfillment, of course, because you're doing big things and you're helping other people attain education and things of that nature. But it wasn't to the point of the conversations and the depth of the conversations where humanity really needs to be having those depths of conversations. When you're end stage of life, those conversations are much different than a stage of someone that is in the commencement of their life undergoing like a new post-secondary education, it's a very different exchange of conversation and where you're able to hold that space.
Yeah, so it's really interesting that you had that NDE to give you a chance to reflect and say, okay, what am I doing with my life? Am I on purpose, not on purpose? You ask yourself lots of a question. For people that are listening, they may not understand this because you had this NDE, I lost the ability to walk, and yet we can say there are no mistakes. How
Yeah.
do you how do you see that when you're nearly death, you're losing the ability to walk, everything's going wrong, if you will? I can say there's no mistakes, that nothing is happening to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so challenging to not take things personally when we're going through our journey and when we're at a place where our belief system is at a place where everything, life is happening to us and not for us. And when we come from that perception that life is happening to us and not for us, it's very easy to be get caught in the dichotomy of life is very hard, life is very challenging. And I completely empathize with that because it's a very challenging place to be. I've seen it. Right now, I'm supporting one of my best friends in my home right now who is palliative and end of stage of life. And seeing her witnessing in her journey, we never question God or the creator when amazing things happen in our life. And for me, it's just always been under the belief spectrum that if I'm not going to question God and the creator when something, great happens in my life, who am I to question God and the creator when something non-ideal happens into my life? What alchemy, what beauty can I take from this experience, from this blessing? What can I be able to see? And a lot of people be like, how can I see the beauty when I've just lost a loved one? I've lost a child. Like I've went through a lot of things. When I talk about the NDEs and when I talk about being called back to the ancestors, I've also went through a lot of deep exploration, a lot of grief within my own process to be able to understand when I'm coming from this place, what is the beauty in these things that I can see? What has the gift have been gifted to me? And how do I change that belief system? Because in the reality, we are limitless beings. We have no limitation. The sky is not the limit. The glass ceiling is not the limit. We absolutely have no limitation. We are limitless. Everything is a choice that we choose in our life. We can choose to look at something in a negative way, or we could choose to look at something in a beautiful way and find the alchemy. And what I mean about the alchemy is how can I take what I just learned here in this experience and this expertise, and how can I help somebody else, or how can I help how I show up in the world and how I create impact within my community? Everything is a choice, right? When we have illness in the body, when we have disease in the body, we can choose to surrender to the illness and understand why the illness is in our body and come from a place of actualized healing. We can choose that pathway, or we can choose to be stuck in the dichotomy of what everybody says that a disease process is or what an illness is. And we can be stuck to the identity and the labeling of that disease progression or of that grief process and allow that to dictate the rest of our life. And everything that we have, even though we have a destiny, we do have free will. And in that free will, we have a choice. Every second of the day, we make thousands of choices of how we want to live our life and how we want to live in our highest alignment. Because you have a disease or because you're undergoing something very challenging doesn't make you any less lovable, doesn't make you any less of a divine being. It's about realizing what the alchemy is of why you're being shown that. Why are you being brought to that experience? What are you needing to learn? What are you needing to understand within yourself, within your own multidimensional self? What is it showing you?
Yeah, some really good stuff in there. Very important not to take things personally. And this is really important to me as well. When you're talking about the progression, that we're making thousands of choices in each moment. So I like to remind people that everyone says this is your disease progression, but does it have to be this way for you, though? For my own case, my diagnosis was my destiny. It was defining my choices, that it didn't open myself up to new possibilities. And it sounds like you're here to be a catalyst to help people say, there are new possibilities here if we can open her up to this greater expanse of herself.
And just in that moment that you just shared in that vulnerability, which is so beautiful, you made a choice to be open minded to something different. So when we're living in a state of sufferance and we're living in a state of scarcity and we're living in a state of fear, we're living in the polarity of love. We're living in the polarity of knowingness and of surrendering and of trusting God's process. And when we're living in that place of dissonance and when we're living in that place of chaos, and that place of where we're doing self-deprecation, we're telling our soul that we are not worthy enough. We're telling our soul that we are not loved, that we do not matter, that we are not worthy of anything more than what we are. And when in reality, everything is that foundational choice. It's a hard choice. Every choice can be looked at as challenging, but that again, that is perception, that is perspective. We make one choice. Am I going to eat this donut or am I going to eat a vegetable? It's a choice. It's a choice. Is this going to add to my disease progression? Is this going to aid my mental health? Is this going to aid my emotional health? Is this going to aid my physical health? Everything that happens in our life, our body keeps track of everything. When we have emotional, dis-ease, when we're in a place of discomfort, or we have an experience happen when we're a child, we take these emotions that are energetic motions and they stay in the body. They get trapped in the body. And that is the disposition. When we see mental health issues, there's a disconnection that has happened from the soul, and there's a disconnection that has happened from the emotional body and from the physical body. It's important to that we understand is that we are multidimensional beings. It's important that we're multidimensionally living in harmony within ourselves, within that harmonic center, and not just in one place of who we are, not just the mind, not just the body, not just the soul. We are multidimensional, multifaceted. So when we make choices, we can choose our highest alignment, or we could choose to stay at the vibration in which we are, or we can choose to go into a lower vibration should we wish.
Yeah,
Right.
it's really deep stuff. And I love that the polarity of love, that I really break it down to the polarity of love of is it, do we are operating from love or are we acting from fear? And I see that this is the disconnection that we have when we're in fear, the fear states and all the emotions that go under fear is when we're too much in the mind trying to understand, too logical, as you talked before, too analytical, as opposed to remembering we are an essence of the creator. If we can tap into the place of unconditional love, like you're talking the love of a baby or a child, we can tap into that place and live life from there, or we can choose to live from the analytical. And you're going to have two different life paths based on what you choose.
You have a multitude of life paths throughout your life, and I'm sure you know that so much as well, is that you have a multitude of pathways that you can take to reach your destiny, right? There's so many things that you can take. I can choose so many different things throughout my day that is going to put me on a different trajectory and a different pathway, and then I could choose another different pathway. It's like all of these little roadways that are going in all of these different directions, and we get to choose which pathway we want to take every single day. And when I've come into like deep connection with God, and what I've really come to understand is that fear is actually a secondary emotion. And our primary emotion from love is sadness, is deep sadness. When we think about the catalyst of what fear is, it's that deep rooted sadness. When we fear for our life, it's a deep rooted sadness that we won't be here to experience the human experience, or that someone that we love will be taken away from us. It always comes to that primary core emotion, which is that deep sadness. It's deep rooted sadness, and love is the trajectory that we're on. So when we're living in a state of fear, we're living in a deep state of sadness. When we're living in deep depression and deep anxiety and deep all of these things, or deep progression or deep disease progression, illness progression, we're living in a state, we can choose to live in that state of sadness, or we could choose to live in a state of love.
Yeah, that's a great way to express it, that a lot of us are sad because we are disconnected. That's a really good way to examine that. And there's just so many different topics that we can get into here, but we are running a little short on time now. So people had questions for you, Roxanne. How would they reach out?
Absolutely. Anybody can get in contact with us through theilluminationretreat.com. I don't have any socials. That is very intentional. I don't like anything that devalues another human being. So my retreats and our website is the only way to contact me forward.
Okay, it's a very interesting approach, and I understand that and honor that's a beautiful way to express yourself and to better serve humanity in the way that feels right for you. Perfect.
Absolutely.
So I really enjoyed having you on the conversation. Thank you, Roxanne.
Thank you for having me. It was such an honor. Thank you.